Intro, soft, serious tone. There is a series of reports hitting the wires this morning that I need you to look at very closely. They involve a man named Galibaf. He's the Speaker of the Iranian parliament, and more importantly, he's the man who spent 21 hours locked in a room in Islamabad across from Vance. Donald Trump personally identified Galibaf as the primary point of contact for Washington, essentially the closest thing Iran had to a legitimate dealmaker. But as of this morning, multiple reports are indicating that Galibaf has resigned as Iran's chief negotiator. Now, if you look at the sourcing, Channel 12 out of Israel, and various regional outlets, the story behind the resignation is a clash of power. Specifically, it's about the IRGC generals. They reportedly stepped in to sabotage a Qatari-brokered proposal that Galibaf was ready to sign. It was a simple, reciprocal arrangement. 20 Iranian ships would get guaranteed passage through the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for 20 Gulf ships. The IRGC killed the deal. Galibaf walked away in protest. As this news broke, oil climbed to $106.80, a 5% jump since Wednesday. Meanwhile, China, the world's biggest observer of this conflict, hasn't uttered a single word. Transition, the analytical pivot. Most analysts looking at this today are calling it internal politics. They see a fractured government, a power struggle between moderates and hardliners that will eventually balance out once the pressure gets high enough. They'll tell you the diplomats are down today, but they might be up tomorrow. I want to offer a different perspective. I'm going to argue that this isn't a political spat at all. It is a signal, and that signal isn't just telling us that Iran is getting harder to talk to. It's signaling that the specific faction inside Iran, the one that believes resistance is actually safer than making a deal, just won the internal war for the country's future. China has seen this movie before. They recognize the exact moment a country's moderate voices are silenced by military commanders just as a peace deal comes within reach. When that happens, the nature of the war changes. I call this the diplomatic displacement signal. If you understand how China reads this moment, which is the polar opposite of how Washington is reading it, you'll understand exactly what is coming next. The details of the resignation. Let's look at what actually happened to Galibaf, because the why matters more than the what. The Qatari proposal wasn't complicated. It was a 20-for-20 swap. Neither side had to formally give up their claims to the water. It was just a practical arrangement to get trade moving. Galibaf saw it as a path forward. The IRGC saw it as a trap. But they didn't reject it because of the number of ships. They rejected it because of the precedent. The IRGC's core stance is that the Strait of Hormuz is under Iranian sovereign authority, period. Any reciprocal deal with the Gulf states implies that those states have equal rights to the water. To the IRGC, that's a surrender of their most powerful strategic lever. When Galibaf tried to push the deal through anyway, the IRGC didn't just block the policy, they moved to replace the person. This isn't a negotiating tactic. This is a structural takeover. The reality of the Iranian government. This week, outlets like Euronews and Iran International have highlighted a grim reality. Under wartime conditions, every critical seat in the Iranian government is now managed directly by the Revolutionary Guards. Galibaf and IRGC might be the faces you see on TV, but they can't breathe without IRGC permission. President Pezeshkian has been effectively sidelined. The IRGC even forced the appointment of Mohammad Bagher Zolgadar as the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, despite the president's vocal objections. So, yes, the civilian government still exists. They still send delegations and write press releases. But every single move they make is subject to an IRGC veto. Today, the guards used that veto to kill the only proposal that had enough middle ground to actually work, correcting the Washington narrative. Over on Truth Social, Donald Trump has been posting that Iran is in turmoil, that they have no leader, and that the infighting is a sign of collapse. Trump is right that they are fighting, But he's misreading what it means. He sees the IRGC's victory over Galabaf as a sign of weakness. I see it as a sign of clarity. A nation doesn't get weaker when its most aggressive, most decisive faction takes total control. It becomes more coherent. A more coherent IRGC isn't an Iran that's closer to a deal. It's an Iran that has systematically removed every person who was actually willing to sign one. The historical context, 1914. China isn't looking for dysfunction stories. They are looking for patterns, and the pattern they see here is one they've studied in depth. Think back to August 1914. In the final days before the world went to war, the civilian diplomats in Europe, men like Jagow in Germany and Berchtold in Austria, were working the phones, trying to find a back channel for de-escalation. But behind the scenes, their respective military commands were already activating mobilization schedules that couldn't be stopped. The diplomats had frameworks for peace. The generals had schedules for war. The generals won. Within 72 hours of that diplomatic displacement, a war started that almost no one actually planned to begin. The IRGC has calculated that the cost of a deal, losing their permanent strategic grip on Hormuz, is higher than the cost of a long-term conflict, and they are making that bet because they have a safety net that Washington continues to underestimate. The decade of quiet and the Chinese safety net. For 10 years, China has been building what I call the decade of quiet. This is a parallel economic universe designed to keep Iran breathing, even if the rest of the world tries to choke it. They have second-tier banks operating outside the SWIFT system. They have a dark fleet of tankers that turn off their transponders and swap oil in the middle of the ocean. That oil is relabeled as Malaysian crude and sent to independent Chinese refineries. China has even built a 1.2 billion barrel strategic reserve using sanctioned oil. They did this specifically so that when oil hits $106 and Hormuz closes, China isn't the one panicking. The proof is in the data. Before this war, Iran was exporting about 1.68 million barrels of oil a day. During the height of the conflict, with Hormuz largely blocked and American bombs falling, Iran's exports actually rose to 1.84 million barrels. Think about that. They are moving more oil during the war than they were before it. Official Chinese records show zero imports from Iran. Yet, China's imports from Malaysia have surged to 1.3 million barrels a day, which is more than double what the entire country of Malaysia actually produces. That is Iranian oil. As long as that money keeps flowing, the IRGC has proof that they can survive without a deal. Every barrel that reaches China is a reason for the IRGC to ignore the diplomats. The 20% gap and the toll question. The negotiations in Islamabad were actually quite close. They were about 80% of the way to a deal. The diplomats, Galabaf and IRGC, were flexible. America wanted a 20-year pause on nuclear enrichment. Iran countered with 5. America wanted the uranium stockpile moved out of the country. Iran wanted to keep it. But the final 20%, the part they couldn't solve, was the sovereignty of Hormuz. America demands free navigation. The IRGC demands coordinated passage. This isn't just a choice of words. It's a question of who owns the gate. By rejecting the Qatari proposal, the IRGC signaled that they aren't interested in blurring that line anymore. And there's a new factor that the mainstream media is missing: tolls. Galabaf's own deputy confirmed this morning that Iran has started collecting actual revenue from tolls imposed on ships crossing the strait. They've turned a geopolitical choke point into a cash cow. When Hormuz was just a leverage point, the goal was to trade it for concessions. Now that it's a revenue stream, the IRGC's incentive is to keep the current system exactly as it is. A peace deal that restores free navigation would literally cost the IRGC money. The American response. While this was happening, Donald Trump ordered the U.S. Navy to destroy Not seize, but destroy any Iranian vessel caught laying mines. It's a massive escalation in the rules of engagement. The IRGC's response: total silence. No threats, no protests, just silence. That silence means one of two things. Either they think they can absorb the losses, or they know the mines that matter are already in the water. Either way, the IRGC is running the show now. The diplomatic faction has vanished from the conversation. The Steelman argument testing the counterview. Now, I want to be fair and look at the optimistic side of this, because there are arguments that this isn't as bad as it looks. First, the report of Galibaf's resignation is still technically unconfirmed by Tehran. It comes from an Israeli source, and Israel has every reason to want the world to think the Iranian government is falling apart. Until we see an official replacement or a statement from Galibaf himself, we have to consider that this might be a rumor. Second, Foreign Minister IRGC is still in his post. He's been the primary channel for these talks, and he has repeatedly said a deal is close. Losing one man doesn't necessarily mean the entire diplomatic wing has folded. Third, the rejection of the Qatari proposal could just be a hard-nosed tactic. Maybe the IRGC is just holding out for a better framing that allows them to save face while still giving America the practical outcome it wants. That's a strong argument. But it doesn't explain why they would remove the person who made the proposal. In the world of high-stakes diplomacy, you can block a policy and keep the relationship. But when you remove the policymaker, you're saying you no longer trust the process itself. What to watch in the next 48 hours. If you want to know which way this is going, watch 3 specific things over the next 2 days. Number 1, watch for an official confirmation or denial from Tehran. If they don't deny the resignation within the next few hours, it means the IRGC's version of the story is the only one that matters in Iran. Silence is a choice. Number 2, watch who replaces Galibaf. If the new negotiator is a career diplomat from IRGC's team, the moderate faction is still on life support. But if the new guy has a background in the IRGC command, then the military hasn't just blocked a deal, they've taken the seat at the table. Number 3, watch China. Specifically, look at the language used by Foreign Minister Wang Yi. If he calls for continuity in the negotiations, it means China is worried about the IRGC takeover. If he just issues a generic call for peace with no mention of the diplomats, it means China has decided a more aggressive, IRGC-led Iran actually suits their interests better. The 2 paths forward. We are at a fork in the road. The first path is that this is a warning shot. America makes a small concession. The IRGC feels it has proven its point, and the talks resume with IRGC leading the way. In this scenario, the 20% gap is still there, but it's solvable with enough creative legal language. The second path is much darker. It's the path where the IRGC's takeover is permanent. In this world, the 20% gap isn't a gap, it's a wall. The IRGC's tolls and their selective control of the strait become the new normal. America's demand for free navigation becomes fundamentally incompatible with Iran's reality. That doesn't lead to a deal. It leads to a stalemate, a long, grinding conflict where the violence flares up and dies down, but the underlying problem never goes away. Closing thoughts. China is ready for either outcome. If there's a deal, they gain influence. If there's a stalemate, they continue to get cheap oil and a strategic advantage over the West. So, when you see the news about Galibaf today, don't just see a politician quitting his job. See the diplomatic displacement signal. Ask yourself why the man Washington wanted to talk to is gone, why the IRGC is suddenly richer, and why China is so incredibly quiet. China already knows the answer. They know what happens when the diplomats leave the room just as a deal was within reach, and they've already positioned themselves for what comes next.